It is now 1 o'clock, although I might give another moment or two for people to trickle in from lunch, since I don't think we're going to use 2 hours here today. I hope not. I think this is going to be a quiet, uncontroversial meeting, I'm sure. So. Yes, I see some skeptical people in the audience as I say that. Can I start with you, John? Robert. Right. Well, it well could be that this is what we're going to get. Which, you know, I mean, I'm sure there are actually some important things happening here at the IETF, technical work that people would like to do. And I'm always happy when I see a process working group with not that many people in the room. That's a good sign, because people should be paying attention to more things, but that doesn't mean this is not an important issue. So why don't we kick off and get started? As you can see, I'm John Peterson. You may have seen me from other process working groups in the past. And I have with me on the screen here my illustrious co-chair, Lisa Doucet. Let's remind you, oh, and by the way, this apparently, Lars could probably tell the story better than me, that you see on the first slide here. This is something that's up in like the buses around town here that the local site team spotted, that shows various ways that you can report abuse if you perceive antisocial behavior in public transportation here in Dublin. And so we thought that would be a fitting place to start today, is with that. Let's remind everybody the session is being recorded. It's still relatively early in the week, so you may not have been to the first session. You may not have seen the Note Well. If you are unfamiliar with the Note Well, which I doubt anyone in this room is, please do note it well. Please read it, and it is for serious stuff, especially the stuff to note really well. And in fact, these are all subjects that are kind of tied into the discussion that we are having here today. Please abide by the IETF Code of Conduct, especially in this participation, as there are a few slightly controversial matters that we might be getting into here. And this slide explains to you some places to go if you feel things are getting a little out of hand, going to places that they shouldn't. This is being recorded. Everybody, please do sign in, use the QR code, which should be up somewhere, although it's not up on my screen now. Oh, it's up right there on the microphone. If you have not done so, please do log in so that we know you're here. Those are our blue sheets now. Finally, again, if this is your first working group you're walking into, there are a few resources for IETF 121 in Dublin that you may review here, including how to get technical assistance if all this seems like a bit much. I know I needed a bit of it when I was setting up here today, and I've been going to the IETF for some time now, so please do utilize those resources. So Lisa and I didn't really publish a formal agenda before this. We just kind of had, hey, there's some things we should talk about. In terms of administrivia, I believe we are still obligated to identify note takers if possible here, and potentially jabber scribing and people like that. Would anyone here like to volunteer to be a note taker? Well, thank you, Mr. Barnes. Good to see you, sir. And jabber scribing, anybody interested in making sure that the jabber chat is receiving the blow-by-blow? It's kind of like you're like a sports commentator, you know, as the game is going on, you're like, you can be witty about it as you do it. We'll let you do that if you're willing to. Anybody here willing to throw themselves on that sword? Well, I can see the jabber in front of me. You know, we will definitely get to that as occasion arises. But this is what we're going to do. Basically, I'm going to say a couple words to start, just to kick off kind of why we're here. And then I'm going to turn this over to Elliot. And Elliot is going to talk a bit about what the different potential solutions are that have been proposed for the work here in MODPOD. And I don't know, as discussion goes, we may even have time for some hums at the end that we'll hack together, take the tally of the room on a few things. But with that, I just wanted to start off by saying a bit about why we are here. We are here, in case you walked into this room off the street and really don't know what this working group is about. I would recommend you leave in that instance, but only be here if you know that you want to be here. But we'd like to see if the IETF community would like to alter our existing moderation procedures. This mostly affects BCP 83 and BCP 45. There are some other potential interactions depending on what precise approach we take. That could include RFC 3934, the way the OMBUDS team operates, a few similar things. We have a couple of input drafts. We have Elliot's draft, we have Lars's draft, and Rob Sayer's draft, which I've heard it characterized that this was, just kind of a helpful suggestion rather than something we should necessarily adopt. But those are inputs that you can go check out if you want to brush up on them right now before we get talking. But I mean, again, just to tee up the problem a bit, I put up this excerpt from RFC 3863 just on a slide so we could, 3683, just so we could look at it and like have a sense of what the existing situation is for posting rights actions. Keith Moore is saying this is useless already. Okay. So, I wanted to put this up just to give a sense of how heavyweight the process actually is to get a posting rights action per the baseline RFC. And I mean, this is something that requires not just, an area director to get involved, then to have an ISG last call, then for it to be discussed by the community, and then it's discussed again by the ISG, and finally it is decided upon from all that. This is a heavyweight process, and we are here to explore a few questions of interest that we hope that the submission drafts will help us clarify. Should moderation procedures be less heavyweight and potentially more discrete? We want to talk about how to deal with moderation outside of the mailing list scoped in the BCPs, including alternate communication channels that did not exist like 20 years ago when PR actions were devised. Nobody was using like Git and Wiki, and Jabber was in use, but not the way we use it now back then. Obviously, we need something that has a more comprehensive approach to this. And one of the bigger questions as well is who should be doing that moderation? A number of people have been proposed to be stuck with this job, some of whom may want it, some of whom may not. But like, once we do that, should there be further approval channels? What should the appeal channel be? Those are the kinds of things we want to explore. And with that, any questions, first of all, about that, and be confused about kind of what we're trying to do here? And if not, I think I will let Elliot take the floor and bring up his prezo. I do. Let me go bring it up. Oh, and Roman did want to say a few words about this.
So I just wanted to jump in before we switch over. No, Elliot, you can stay up there. As the responsible kind of Gen AD, I want to say thank you to all the proponents and all those that we're discussing on the mail list that got us to the point to have this working group. I think it's an extremely critical thing we're about to do here in the IETF that's going to be cross-cutting across all of the technical work and a key enabler to doing all of that technical work. So I'm gratified there's a lot of kind of folks here, and we're going to continue to have that conversation. And of course, tongue-in-cheek about the potential controversies we might have in this kind of working group. So I want to very much kind of thank both John and Lisa for their willingness to serve in these working group kind of chair roles. I mean, I'm very, very much appreciated, and we as a community appreciate you helping us have this challenging conversation.
Thank you, Roman. All right, Elliot, you are up.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Let's go to the next slide. Right, so I think John pretty much covered this. I would say just to add a few thoughts, right? We've now seen the process sort of go through a couple times, and it's been painful each time. So everybody agrees that there's a problem. So one of the points that was made, I think I want to just highlight here, is apart from it being painful on all parties, it's also taken up a lot of community resources. And I think one of my goals has been to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future. Next slide, please. All right, now, since we last met, and many of us were here for this in July, we had a birds of a feather session. We talked a little bit about what we needed. And so this, by the way, is best looked at on your laptop as opposed to trying to read all of this. But we have a charter, and the nice thing about that charter is that it has already answered some questions for us in terms of how we're going to address certain points, and I'll come to that in a little bit more detail in a slide that's coming up. But as you can see, one of the things we're going to be aiming at is a cross-cutting approach for how we deal with the needs of moderation. And we had, as John said, we have to figure out who's going to take the action. One thing I want to clarify on this slide in the charter is where it says, you'll see that we talk about appeals. We also talk about this notion of review. That term, as it turns out, was ambiguous. And what was intended there was, so suppose somebody gets banned from a list or something like that. The idea of review is that from time to time, that person could ask to be reinstated. And that was what is meant by the last bullet item on the charter slide. Okay. I'm going to suggest people read this online so that their eyes don't go crazy as mine are now. Next slide, please. Right, so there are 3 drafts that we can talk about, plus a mailing list message sent by Dan Harkins in terms of proposals that were made. I'm only going to talk about the 2 drafts on this slide, and then I'm going to mention Rob's draft on the next slide. And this basically this is a comparison. And now the BCP 83 replacement draft actually came about because, as it happens, we thought that the other draft was dead. And we thought, well, it's probably a good idea to kick this thing up. As it turns out, it wasn't as dead as we thought it was. Yeah. So the authors have actually been talking. We think there's a lot of common ground already, and some questions have been answered by the charter already. So things have shifted since July. But just to lay out some of a little bit of a comparison, right? The EAHC draft, really, it seems like the goals were to make sure that we're enforcing an inclusive environment, to be more responsive, and to not create the sort of churn and pain that we saw on the last call list. We had very similar goals, actually, very much minimal intervention to enforce the code of conduct. Again, more responsive approach, don't commit the same things, don't create community feedback. We were also a little bit concerned about how much community resources are devoted to the activity. One of the things that I think we as a community have to come to terms with is that there's the community is a precious resource, and we wanted to address that. And then we want to make sure that, to the extent possible, the dignity of all individuals could be respected. Major difference between the 2 works was that EAHC really did cover all communication. It does cover all communications channel, whereas the BCP 83 replacement was really focused on plenary lists. And so the charter already answers this question. We're going to go with the one on the left, right, in terms of working to address an approach that covers all channels. So that of course is directly related to what the documents update. And you can see below which ones we think those are. There's a difference as to who moderates between the work. There's a moderation team proposed by draft ECAHC, and we thought, the co-authors of the BCP 83 replacement thought that in order to preserve, reduce the load on the community, this could be something that could be delegated to the IETF executive director. I think since our drafts came out, at least thus far, what we've heard is really that people don't like the idea of the IETF executive director doing this. I think it may be worth just a little more discussion to just confirm that, with the notion that we should figure out how we are preserving community resources. Let's see here, the processes, there's a slight, there's a slightly different line in terms of how much gets defined now versus later. And so if we presume that there's a moderation team, EAHC says, well, the moderation team will define their working methods, and elaborate on, for transparency purposes in terms of how they will work. In the other draft, we tried to be a lot more, it sounds like we tried to be a lot more prescriptive, but at the end of the day, both drafts really say, well, the moderation team or in our draft, the IED would have the widest possible latitude to address a situation as was required. And so I think that that's actually, there's a lot of commonality there. And that goes to the next point in terms of flexibility, right? For transparency, I think there was some work to be done in terms of in the EAHC draft in terms of what that would look like exactly. And in the BCP 83 replacement draft, we had a thought of a graduated form of transparency in terms of protecting dignity and balancing those up to a point. And the idea is if the moderator had said to, for instance, two individuals who are fighting, go get a beer and get this off the list, and that solved the problem, there'd be no need for real transparency if in that case. And this, I think, is something that Rob Sayre's excellent draft also covers in terms of graduated. And I think probably there's some room there for development in terms of common ground. Appeals, mostly speaking, they're pretty much the same, I think, in the two works. Review of decisions, EAHC doesn't, I think, specify that. We said something like no fewer than every 12 months would a person who had been banned be able to make a request for being reinstated. Team diversity was the exact opposite in that EAHC was very specific about this, whereas we didn't cover that ground. Relationship to the ombudsman team, again, Lars was pretty clear that there's a pretty clear dividing line in terms of what can be shared between the different functions. We in the BCP 83 replacement draft didn't go that far. So that's the rough idea, and quite frankly, at least at the goals and I think in a lot of the areas that in terms of operations, there's a tremendous amount of overlap. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so then there's draft Sayre MODPOD Excellent, which is a pretty good tongue-in-cheek name based on the argument that was had on the MODPOD list. And so the idea here is that it would give moderators the right or capability to block or filter someone, and exactly how much transparency and oversight would be needed depended on how long the block would last. This one doesn't try to answer who actually pulls the trigger. Now, one point, by the way, that we do have to address in terms of now that we're scoping the entire all communications channels, is that there's going to be some overlap between what a quote moderator unquote and say a working group chair. And so we'll have to step through that a little bit in terms of balancing, as the charter says, consistency with also the ability to respond to a particular situation. And the working group chairs may know that a person can be productive. If moderators want to take a more broad thing, there's going to have to be a decision process around that. Okay, next slide, please. I think that might be it. Is that right? No, next steps, right? So, right. So I think obviously next steps, there's the opportunity to combine these drafts. I think that should just happen. There's no need, I think, for dueling drafts at this point. Nobody, so far as I can tell, is really being proprietary about their words, which is really good. This has already been a pretty collaborative effort. So we want to do that. So as I mentioned, some of the differences that the drafts have really already been decided in the charter, and we can just, elaborate that, in terms of what the charter said we had to do, make sure that we actually do it. So for instance, going across different communities, different communications venues. I think some of these will require some discussion, like the working group overlap working group chair overlap is one that will require some discussion. I'm pretty sure people will want to have discussion about how transparency and how much transparency. So, we should probably just start, doing the combination, open some issues, debate those issues, either using GitHub or something like that, set them up, knock them down, is the way I see this moving forward. Maybe I'm being simplistic, optimistic. I don't know, but I think we can get this done. I think there's a lot of room for finding common ground here. Next slide. I think that's it. Yeah. Questions, comments, anything else on in terms of what I've said?
And just to be clear, we don't have more content to show, right?
Right.
Th-
So this is
the
really your
plan.
opportunity.
This is the plan. If nobody tells us otherwise,
Yeah.
and I mean, Lars or whomever else, feel free to chime in on this. Consolidating, finding a common author team that is going to serve as editors for the specification going forward. That would be the plan. If you don't like that plan, or you think that these are not the right input documents and that we should be doing something different, I do see Keith, you on the queue there, or at least in the Jabber talking about it. This would be a good time to let us know.
One quick thing before you take the mic, Pete, was I just want to ask Lars if I properly represented your work and what in terms of your views.
Yeah, great. This is fine, and I have some minor sort of clarifications, even too strong a word. But I'm going to ask you to flip back to the thing that had the big table.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you for doing.
That's
this.
a good thing to have up here, I think, in general, probably for the discussion going forward. So let's just bring that up. Pete.
So this is Pete Resnick. I've got one overall concern with the idea of combining these, and it's that particularly with the idea that some of this started with a BCP 83 replacement, which is about strictly banning from mailing lists. That's it, right? This working group is committed to a whole discussion of moderating discussions which should not involve banning from mailing lists, right? There's other ways to moderate the process. Chairs need to do certain kinds of moderation just by way of directing the conversation, need to calm people down if people are getting over enthusiastic, blah, 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 blah. I'm afraid that by going down the path of just combining the drafts and going forward with this, we are going to be missing working on what I think is a more core problem, which is how to do more graduated, very fine-grained moderation, because this stuff should be the absolute last ditch. We can't do anything else. This is now a disaster, and we have to ban someone from a list.
Right. So Pete, stick around for just a second. So the intent, I think, of the BCP 83 replacement was to get us out of that. I think we're in agreement, actually. The idea is to, at least from the BCP 83 perspective, was to use the least amount of pressure necessary to get the forum back on track and to maintain comedy. Sometimes it might mean going to an extreme of banning, but I think in our history we have 2 instances of that, right? So, or maybe a couple more, but they're very rare. Right? But when they happen, they're just very bad, right? So I agree with you on that point, and I don't want to lose sight of that. And I think the other thing I want to highlight is that there's no, even if we take draft ECAHC, the intent is that there be no bias towards the words in the document if there are issues open, right? We discuss and we decide when we come to a rough consensus.
Fair enough.
I mean, I guess, Pete, to understand. So would you prefer there were 2 separate documents? One that, is that what you're advocating for?
I'm sort of leaning in that direction. I'll say that part of that is based on, I have some sort of core, let's just call them reservations about the idea of moderators separate from chairs for working group work that is going to have to be sorted as an issue anyway. Yeah. I get that this is not a decided thing. And so the idea that we're sort of going in the direction of these documents without sort of working from the base up just makes me a little nervous. But so long as the issues are open and we're going to figure out how to do that, I guess it doesn't really matter. Just the way this was presented, I was worried that's the direction we were going, is starting top down.
Okay. Next, Lars.
Yes, so I queued up a few things now. So on that topic, so I would maybe phrase it as you have the intended flexibility row there, right? So I think the goal is to describe a arsenal of tools or responses that are described for those who are charged with moderation, whether that's chairs or a moderation team or a combination of them. All the way up until the current maximum hammer that we have, which is the PR action, right? Which we as part of like specifying what the gradual responses are, also want to reform. But I agree with Pete that that shouldn't be like the only thing we do, and maybe it's not even the most important thing we do. But it's certainly in scope, because like if you know if you're in that really bad space, that's really the only thing you can do. The other thing I actually got into line to talk about was this relationship to the ombuds team, which in the draft rewrote, we basically said, you know, nothing changes here, no information is shared, because we didn't want to reform the role of the ombuds team or its scope. If in the process of doing the work here, we realized maybe there's a better relationship between this moderation function and the ombuds team that requires to change that relationship, I think we can like ask for a recharter or something. But going into this, I thought we didn't want to open up that kind of worms at the same time, right? So and then maybe we can leave it like that, or maybe we realize, oh yeah, in order to make this real good, we need to change what the ombuds team is doing. And in terms of the sort of the what Pete said last, and I'm skipping topics a little bit, you know, that you're saying you're uncomfortable with anybody other than the chairs doing the moderation. In an ideal world, right, that was like the vision. Like the chairs moderate the groups, and if there's anything super bad, it bubbles up to the air directors. And it turns out that the chairs are not all excellent at moderation, and they're also not consistent. And also, it's sometimes been very difficult to get individual chairs to do something, because in their group, it wasn't disruptive enough. But across groups, it was, definitely. And we don't have a mechanism to do anything about that sort of behavior other than at the moment of PR action, which is often too heavyweight. And that sort of motivated this realization that we need something that actually is organizational spanning. Anyway, thanks.
Sean, you're up, although do you have an interrupt there, Roman?
Hi, Roman Danilio's responsible AD. I just wanted to jump in with the interrupt. We were talking about ombuds, maybe just make it really clear, updating 7776, which is the ombuds procedures, is out of scope as the charter is currently written. So we would actually have to revise the charter to open up that box.
Yep. So I guess I'm kind of acting, this is Sean Turner, I think I'm acting as kind of the impromptu chapter scribe here. That's somewhere back in the way. I think Keith can't hear this, but he did say, I tried to post this in the mailing list, but it was moderated. In my humble opinion, neither of these drafts associated with this group should be used as a starting point for this working group output. So I just thought I'd get that on record for his opinion.
Thank you, Sean. David Skenazy. So I guess we'll say the opposite of what Keith was saying to some extent, which is, I think this plan sounds really good to me. I think this will be hard to get right, but we will work together and we will get it done. I absolutely am convinced we can. And it might take some time, but we will get it done. And so this plan of taking these two reasonable drafts and like is a great starting point, much better than a single draft, because then it very easily pops out all the, oh, we could do A or B. So that's a very good starting issue list. We're going to have more issues come in. I'm sure I'll file some, and we'll have discussions and we'll do this. So this sounds like a very solid plan. And I actually like this idea of starting with two drafts that are in quite different directions, because it helps isolate the degrees of freedom we have here.
And don't forget the third one, because I do think Rob has some interesting ideas.
Yes, absolutely.
Harold.
Harald Adelstrand, feeling somewhat guilty since I'm the one who told Marshall Rose he should propose this. One of the things I learned was that when we specify exact procedures for something, we usually get them wrong, and we usually need to change them. So my ideal would be that we have a very short document saying, here's the area of responsibility, here's who's responsible. He should publish, whoever is responsible for publishing their working methods. And that's the only thing that should be BCP. The rest should be published in whatever mechanism is appropriate. I like info RFCs because they're permanent record, but don't try to set the details into stone. It's bad. It only belongs on tombstones.
So Harold, I think that's an issue we're going to have to, I think we're going to have to take that point and step through point by point to see, does this belong or does this not belong? Right. And then, because I think the community will want to have consensus on some things, right? And maybe not care about certain other things. That's the question we'll have to address.
Mr. Farrell.
Stephen Farrell. So I'm kind of agreeing partly with lots of what's been said, but not totally with any of it. Yeah. So I think a factor that we haven't mentioned is, you know, as issues are discussed, some of those issues will involve who gets to make what decisions. And so, for example, a decision to take this bit of behavior warrants escalating to this level or whatever. I think we should be very clear about that. And I think there's a concern, whilst I think Lars is right that there's lack of consistency across working groups. Not every chair is good at doing this. It would be a concern if you had this kind of moderation team dropping and parachuting out of the sky and saying, I declare that this behavior is so bad, in disagreeing with the relevant working group chairs. So I think that's the thing we have to be careful about and try and figure out who do we think should make what decisions. And then I start agreeing with Harold and saying, well, maybe we shouldn't write it down.
Once it's written down, then it just becomes something to hack around, right? Yeah. Well, I believe, our queue is not quite finished yet, Mr. Levine, sorry.
Yeah, John Levine. I've been moderating mailing lists and Usenet news groups, if everybody remembers what those are, for 30 years. And I have, in my experience, there's a fairly limited range of actions that are useful. I mean, in lists, typically, some people they misbehave and you warn them once or twice and they get the idea. Okay, other people you warn them once or twice and it's clear they'll never get the idea. So yeah, so that yeah, so the only practical response is to ban them to keep the forum useful. It also seems to me that an important distinction between these drafts is between working group mailing lists, where the first line of authority really needs to be the chairs, and the general mailing lists where we need. I mean, I have my doubt about a large moderation team means that you're going to have a committee having a discussion every time somebody does something. And something I've definitely discovered is that moderation works much better if it's quick. And if the reaction to misbehavior is fast enough that everybody suddenly realizes, like, oh, that was the problem and we dealt with it.
Yeah. And 3683 is not quick.
No kidding.
Okay, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Campling. Just an observation which may be useful. Having been at RIPE last week, they have, my understanding of it, they have a larger sort of equivalent of an ombuds team, about 10 people or 12 people, which also does list moderation, which I think means you have a benefit of consistency of the sorts of things that are moderated across both the ombuds team, so if you like, for in-person behavior versus on-list behavior, and they have the same set of things that are frowned upon across all of those, rather than treating them as distinct and separate in some way. So I know that, I don't think that's in either of these drafts, but I just thought that was worth highlighting, as there is, if you like, dare I say, a third way, which I personally think is worth exploring.
Well, I mean, I think, in the ECAHC draft, it does have this notion that the moderation team is there to enforce consistent standards across this. And like that they really get to define the processes. This though gets back to some of the points that have been raised. Who should define the processes? Should they be written down or not written down, to Stephen's point? And there's a trade-off there. I mean, either way has its pluses and minuses. And now Amanda's coming to the mic to talk to us about the IETF executive director's role in this and why they should have nothing to do with it.
No,
yes.
No, I'm not. Thank you. Jay Daly, IETF executive director. Two things. This is such a complicated subject with so many people having so many different areas that they think are important here. A while ago, I sent a message to the list that was a sort of checklist of all of the different things that people had raised that you could use to assess a draft against, not to determine whether a draft was good or bad, simply to ensure whether it had the coverage of all the issues that people expected covered, within there. That's just a reminder, and I'm happy to write that up again. The second point is that while the procedures are, of course, very, very important, inherent in any set of procedures are people's expectations about what kind of organisation we have. So, for example, very clearly, there are some people who believe that we ought to have an organisation that would politely describe as robust, and which other people might describe as, rude. So I think it's quite important to try to get some of that out. Not just, what the procedures should be, it's what the aim is, what the goal here is in terms of those procedures, because that can hopefully then determine what are appropriate mechanisms or what are suitable mechanisms to achieve that goal.
And I do think, again, some of the language about inclusivity in Lars's draft, I think, is getting to exactly that point. I mean, a lot of the aim of trying to revise these policies is to get an organization that we believe will be more inclusive and friendlier to new participants who perhaps are not as accustomed to the friction that we have thrived on, if we'll call it that, for the last 30 years or so.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that friction is real, to be honest. I mean, it has happened at times and has done, but I think it's become something that's more mythological than necessarily a core part of the way that things have required to happen. What I mean by that is I'm not saying it hasn't happened. I'm saying that the belief that it had to happen in order to get things is something that I would personally challenge. Yep. But I think I agree with you. This is the type of thing that needs to come out. This year.
Fantastic, thanks. Colin?
Hi, Colin Perkins. I'm sure that Q slide has gotten smaller since the last meeting. or I need new glasses, I'm not sure which.
See it.
Colin Perkins. Yes, we absolutely need this. I think it's absolutely critical that we have this group and that it succeeds. The IETF has had a significant problem with, I think it's robust discussion, as Jay says, scaring people off. And I think that's a real problem, and it has been a significant problem. I think it is still an ongoing problem in certain lists. I also agree with Harold that this is an area where it's not possible to write down a precise set of rules. That just leads to people nitpicking and rules lawyering, and that does not solve the concerns of either the person being moderated or the people who have issues with the behavior which caused the moderation to happen. What we should do is write down a set of principles. Have a clear set of principles which guide moderation and have a clear approach to how to appeal if you disagree with the way those principles have been applied. I think that's what we should be aiming to do here, rather than trying to write down a precise set of conditions which drive the decisions. That said, I think starting with these drafts is a perfectly reasonable starting point. They're two very reasonable drafts. I don't agree with everything in them, and they disagree with each other in a bunch of places, but they're a good starting point. And yes, I think this is a perfectly good approach to progressing the work, and I hope it succeeds.
So are you more in favor of a merger or having them both proceed independently?
No, I think we should merge them into a common draft, and yes, there'll be a whole bunch of discussion about which features we take from each draft and how we evolve it. But yeah,
and did I correctly?
The usual process for a working group.
And did I correctly hear you there? And I've heard this from a number of people here so far. This notion that the processes really should be the discretion, effectively, of like a moderation team, more than something that we're going to codify in the draft as a set of rules.
Yes, I think if we try to codify it as a set of rules, we will be here forever.
Yes.
And
it will not actually solve the problem.
Whereas saying, and it will suddenly, as soon as we have written down and published it, some corner case will come up which we haven't realized, and we'll be revising it again.
But if there's a set of guiding principles like inclusivity, right, where we're saying, okay, moderation team, enforce inclusivity,
yes,
and use your discretion to do that.
Define
that we'd be doing it better.
Principles, appoint a sane set of people, and have a process for appealing decisions, and have a process for appealing the choice of moderators.
Okay, helpful, thank you. Mr. St. John's.
Mike St. John's. Hopefully surprising no one, I was the first person who was ever threatened with banning on an IETF mailing list. This was at the time Phil Gross was the chair, and there was no capability for banning anyone on a mailing list. I'd been pushing back against something Phil was trying to do that was actually problematic. And what I offered to the list was, I'm willing to shut up if you want to invoke cloture on me, and offered it to the list itself to say, yeah, let's stop doing this. Cloture never happened. We finished the issue. Phil and I shook hands later on. But one of the things you need to stop, one of the things I get worried about, and I think what I'm seeing from Keith and some other people, is this being used as a control point as opposed to a way of moving forward the standards. So keep that in mind. When the balance is between those two, error on the basis of trying to move forward, have the talk if you need with the people, but make sure this is standards oriented, but people friendly.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Andrew, once again, our returning champion.
Yes, apologies saying I forgot to mention earlier. The other thing I meant to say about the RIPE Code of Conduct, which I think is worth considering, it lists at various points examples of good or bad behavior for their definitions of good and bad. But every time it says this is a non-exclusive list, these are examples.
Mm-hmm.
So to the point about how prescriptive you want to be, I would say whatever is we end up with, don't try and be prescriptive, because frankly, that leaves loopholes that will be exploited. Have moderators that have discretion to adapt to the circumstances. Otherwise, this won't work very well.
Roman.
Hi, Roman Danilio is the responsible AD doing my interrupt. Just a reminder to the group that working on the IETF Code of Conduct, which is RFC 7154, is out of scope for this working group.
Yes. Chris.
Hi, Chris Box, member of the current moderation team for the IETF list.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got a number of points. So first of all, I agree with the aim of merging the three drafts. I think that'd be a good approach. On flexibility, I do agree with Harold's point. I don't think we should set this in stone. We need that flexibility. We haven't really talked about who's going to do the moderation. I agree with the point there, which is by a moderation team. I recommend that we say that we have a minimum of 5 people in that team, so that we have enough people within that set of 5 in order to respond in a timely manner. I say at least 5. We can scale it up if necessary, if we find that's not enough, if the people are too busy. My final point is on the question of dignity versus transparency. So the current IETF list procedures, I would say they err on the side of dignity. They generally, most of the interventions are level 0. With level 0, we see nothing to the list. Possibly, I mean, sometimes I feel that we ought to have some way of conveying to the community that action has been taken, but we just don't have that open to us at the moment.
And what do you think is a good fix for that, if you have one in mind?
It's not an easy.
It's not, is it?
I don't have a proposal on it, no.
Yeah.
Chris, can you answer a question or two? And it's perfectly fair to say, no, I can't answer this question. Can you give a rough order of magnitude of level 0 interactions that you've had, say, over the last year?
We do publish stats.
Oh, okay.
I'll look them up and I'll share them.
Yeah, I think that would be very informative for this discussion.
Okay.
Mr. Farrell, again, another returning champion.
Trying to discourage people from going to the mic.
Of course not.
Stephen Farrell. So actually, Chris reminded me of something there. He mentions like size of moderation team. There's a practicality thing here. You know, there's how many mailing lists are we talking about? There's like 100 some working groups, more mailing lists. more interaction channels, some of which are interactive.
Wikis and jabbers and gits and
Right. And I do have a real concern at the practicality of having a team supposedly assisting or enforcing, I think a word you used, which pricked up my ears, stuff across the breadth of that. I mean, 5 people cannot do that in any universe. 100 people can't do it because we don't want 100 people moderation team. You'd never get one. So I don't know if it's worth spending time discussing here, but I don't understand other people's perceptions of the scale of this moderation team.
Well, again, and I don't think that this is, people may have different notions about it. I think this is something where the attention of the moderation team would be brought to whatever the source of problematic communication is, rather than that they're conducting surveillance across the entire apparatus of possible ways you could participate in the IETF. I mean, Lars, was that roughly your intention in your draft? I mean, certainly, I don't think Jay is in a position to do that surveillance single-handed. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think in the words in the charter, consistency actually was one that Ramon, you actually were very keen on, but I don't necessarily think that consistency only means going through and scrubbing every mailing list. It just means that in a given situation, you're applying the same rules consistently, from one situation to another. And it could be that that allows us some, it doesn't mean that we have to be scrubbing lists constantly, but it could also mean that if somebody I'll give you an example, Stephen, somebody complains on one list about someone, and what ends up happening is the moderators somehow get involved. That's a question. And they click on, and we have some tooling to go look at the other messages that this guy or this person has been.
Oh, big guy.
Yeah, regrettably, has to see if there's trouble being caused on other lists, and then to say, okay, hey, maybe we have a broader problem with this person, and figure out what to do. And then the point that I think you're making is, okay, great, but you can't just have a moderator come down and say that guy's off of all lists without really having a good consultation with the working groups.
Sure. That I totally agree with that. I also agree with John when he's saying, somebody has to say, I think this is a bit bad, and ask for some help from a moderation team. That all makes sense. But I don't know if I'm wrong in this, but I have the impression that people have different ideas about the scale of the moderation team. And if anybody has an idea of a scale of a moderation team that's like, I don't know, is even 20 feasible?
It depends on how it operates, I suppose, but I hope we don't need 20.
Yeah, me too. Well, I mean, again, in the statistics, I think will help us to understand that, right? If we get to just looking at, the IETF discussion list, which, let's face it, that is the lightning rod, right? Like, of the list, that is the place the majority of the actionable incidents have occurred. So do you have some numbers for us, Tom?
I do.
Chris, sorry.
So list results for the IETF list. So this year we have done 7 level 0s, 1 level 1, and 1 level 2. And that's pretty similar for previous years, actually. It's always that kind of ratio.
So, I mean, that does not sound super onerous to me, Steve. Yeah, for one list. Oh, you're welcome to, yeah. Since I did call you out, you are welcome to come back, yes.
Right, but so then actually this is more of a question for Chris. So Chris is saying maybe 5 is not enough, and that's I wasn't clear if that was in the context of just the IETF discuss list or if that was more broadly. What do we think is enough? I mean, if it's that, if it's a handful of issues for the IETF list, which is one of the more problematic ones, I just don't have a sense that we're actually thinking about the same scale of these things, and I think that might make a difference.
I think I'm going to become a contributor here.
Okay. Yes, you're welcome to go to the mic. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was just saying. I mean, if we think that is at least 2x what all the other problems are in the IETF, we're still dealing then with just like 2 handfuls of problems a year, right? Like, and I'd be surprised actually if it was more than that. But I don't know. I could be wrong. Sorry, Lars.
Yeah, so I think you're right saying that the discuss list is usually the one that has most incidents. As far as I'm aware, the individuals that are sort of misbehaving on the discuss list then sometimes also misbehave on other lists. But I can't recall a case where it was limited to another list and then bubbled up to something that wasn't handled by chair. I think we're sort of rat holing a little bit on the size of the team, right? So the mental model that at least sort of on our draft we had in mind is that that moderation team would basically monitor proactively what Elliot called the plenary lists, where at the moment, like the IETF chair needs to find like last call moderators, for example, and obviously people for the moderation team. And they would be available as a resource to chairs to basically, where the chairs can reach out and say, hey, we have this thing going on, can you help us? Or participants can maybe point the moderation team at something, hey, there's something on this list and I don't know if the chair's doing anything about it, could you like reach out? And that was sort of the model we had in mind. So we did not want this team to be stuck with like surveilling all ongoing, and we're also talking about lists all the time, right? The intent is like all channels, like GitHub repos. Good luck, right? But basically have them be reactively available if some participant feels there's something happening that a moderator should look at. And yeah, thank you, Chris and others for doing the hard work and never getting any thank you for doing it before.
Well, they're getting a thank you right now. A round of applause, please, for the 9245 crew. Jay.
Jay Daly again. From my perspective, the size of the current moderation team is about 250 people. It's the working group chairs. We just don't see it that way or consider it that way. We don't look at such things necessarily as consistency, training, all of those kind of things across that. But we actually do have 250 people now involved in it.
Yep. Okay. Colin?
Hi, Colin Perkins. I think I would urge caution in suggesting that the problem is only on the plenary lists.
Oh, we're not suggesting it is. I don't think anyone said that it's solely there. It's just that plenary lists have overwhelmingly been where this bubbles up, and the same people may be problematic in other areas. But I think it gives us a rough order of magnitude. If that's the amount we're seeing in plenary lists, I think probably the amount that is elsewhere, other than that would be actionable under the kinds of changes we're describing, it's probably not more than 2x. Right, what's on the plenary list?
I'm not sure I agree with that.
Okay, like I said, it was just speculation on my part.
My feel, I mean, certainly the plenary lists are problematic in a lot of ways, and they seem to be the area where some of the more serious complaints occur. My impression is that there are a lot of low-level issues on the other lists, which are handled by the working group chairs in a sort of quiet way. And if we're trying to bring consistency and bring a moderation team in, if they want visibility into all of that, I suspect that's a lot of work. If it's just handling the serious issues on those lists, then I would suggest you're probably right. So it depends where in the process we want them to get involved.
And this goes back to what Pete, I think, was saying earlier, and as well to Jay's point that it's really 250 people that are the moderator team, and it might be part of this enterprise really to figure out how we would want to divide between what naturally working group chairs do and what the moderation team does. And I think there is already some text to that effect in at least one of the input drafts.
Yeah, right. And one of the concerns is going to be getting the moderation team involved in a timely manner.
Well, I think it's their job to be, they're first responders, they're emergency responders.
But for that, they have to, if you want them as first responders, they have to proactively monitor all the
second
lists.
second responders.
And if they're second responders, that introduces timeliness questions. So there's some complex issues to talk through.
Sure. It's just Nazi.
I don't get to be a returning champion.
We've seen this list cycle through enough times now. I'm going to dispense with that particular joke. I'll make up a new one.
All right, David Skanazi, usual suspect. So I want to agree to a lot of what's been said, but also that this is really resolvable, because I think the plenary lists aren't the only place where the problem is, but it's where it's been most acute. So I think having the moderation team be first responder there makes a lot of sense. For a lot of the other lists, let's say working group lists, I think the chairs in the overwhelming majority of cases do the first responder job well. And if we have the moderators as second responders, where the chair can reach out for them for advice, or anyone in the community can reach out to the moderation team and say, hey, the chair isn't catching this because maybe it's night their time, or maybe they're choosing to ignore it, whatever, that kind of model makes it resolvable to me as like a group of 5 to 10-ish people is enough, because they don't need to watch every message of every list, which is too much. But like kind of a hybrid like that seems really workable. We'll have to figure out the details, but I really believe we can.
Yeah, and I don't think we do, as Laura said earlier, want to rat hole too much on what the exact size of that team needs to be in this room. I think it'd be good if we had a rough idea if it's feasible or not, right? Because I think we do need that as we look at potentially merging the drafts. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that it's feasible, not that.
Okay. Miria, first time, a long time listener, first time caller, as we say in the United States.
Mia Kulemin. So it seems like we're converging on that people want a moderation team here. And so I thought it might be useful for me to note that I also talked to the RIPE, to person from the RIPE team last week, just coincidentally. And the two takeaways from that conversation, which was really random, was first of all, it seems like, so they are kind of moderation team and ombuds team in one thing. So I think it's actually good to have that separated. But I think it's also more than list moderation. So what they said is, often they are more mediator. It's people like feeling treated not correctly in some environment, not only in mailing list, and it's not like harassment, but they have to mediate as well. So maybe the scope of this is a little bit bigger. And the second thing that I took away from this is also they're currently revising their processes that they've written down because they were much too narrow, and with the practical experience they had now, they have to change all kind of things, and that means like really changing little details in the document. So I think we should also be careful about what the details are we're specifying, rather than just specifying something high level. But my actual point is, I think maybe we should invite them and give a presentation.
Yeah. No, I think Roman, you had actually reached out to them at one point, right? Or yeah, to the RIPE team. We would love, I mean, we would love to plagiarize, I'm sure, their text if they have more experience on this than we do.
Yeah, Roman did it was a responsibility. Yes, I did reach out. There were some logistical kind of challenges and we weren't able to make it work for the time horizon we were talking about.
Okay. Yep, you're up, Lars.
Yeah, Lars Eckert. So I want to point out we also have this concept of what's called a non-working group list, and those are interesting because as I found out, you can actually start one way back when, and congratulations, you are now basically the moderator for that. I think the ISG has made a statement that says for those groups, the owners of the list act as the moderators, and then you can also leave that list. And I'm not kidding, right? And you're still the owner, except you're not getting the emails. But the thing is, also, I think it's sort of not a lot of the people who are sort of these non-working group owners understand that they are supposed to moderate. And I've seen cases of non-working group lists that were especially associated with site meetings, where the owners were the people who were significantly, stepping over the line. And so that sort of particular wrinkle, I think we need to explore a little bit and figure out how we would tie that into this, because the chairs you can sort of rely on. There's an AD that's sort of supposed to pay attention, and the chairs usually know their chairs. But we need to figure out some of these details as we work on.
I mean, my naive intuition is anywhere where note well and note really well applies, this applies. And if there are lists where it does not apply, this does not apply. Would be, I mean, it might be a simple litmus test, but Mr. Resnick.
Yeah, I think that's still my father. So I want us to be careful about conflating what we're proposing here with what places like RIPE do, because they don't carve the world the way we did. Because they do moderation, they do other things that the ombuds team does. In this community, the way we've carved it is if it's that you're interfering with the way the working group or the mailing list is getting its work done, and it's just interference, and you're interfering with the progression of the work, then it's the chair or the list moderator's responsibility. And if it's harassment, which has a whole different set of things, that goes to the ombuds team, which is something we're not touching. And we, the kinds of work that the ombuds team does, I mean, to give the concern from inside that Keith is giving from the outside, that's the kind of thing that really power has to be managed very carefully, because it could really get out of control. And I think, we've currently got a team, hopefully less me really soon, that does have that kind of responsibility in that sense of we've got to do things very carefully. I don't want list moderators being in that same mode. I want them to not have so much power and therefore, and along with it, not so much responsibility. They're to keep discussion on track, people not getting angry and yelling at each other and all that. But beyond that, it's a very different role from what the folks at RIPE and ICANN are doing.
Got it. Elliot?
Okay, 2 points. It's been made, the point's been made several times that there could be, say, abuse of the use of moderators in order to, I don't know, steer a result or something like that, or otherwise prevent people who have a viewpoint from sharing. One of the reasons that we had initially chosen the IETF executive director as a good person to do this is that his only agenda really is to maintain the comity of the organization, the goals of the organization. Now, that's something that can be hard to do from a volunteer perspective, and we should at least keep that in mind as we're thinking about this problem. The second point I wanted to make is completely different, which is we've been thinking in our heads, I'm pretty sure in this room, about mailing lists. And the charter text talks about different fora, in fact, being consistent across all fora. And so one of the things I think we need to have in our mindset is what all are those other fora, and what are the levers that we have in those fora? And not that we have to enumerate the procedures for them, but just to understand if we need different types of moderators or different types of moderation functions, so that we're understanding both the technology side of it and also the, if there's a different human interaction side of it, we need to understand that too. I'm not trying to be at all prescriptive at this moment in time, right? Because I honestly don't know what it means yet to cover all these fora. So I just think we should at least have a couple of examples in our heads as we lay down policy. So.
Marianne.
Just quickly back at the mic to clarify something I said. First of all, I don't think we should copy the RIPE model, but they have some practical experience that I think we can benefit from. And then the second part is that my takeaway was that the part that is done by our ombuds team, the actual harassment, that is like only a very small portion of the work. The most of the things they are doing is like all the things all around this, which is also going beyond list moderation. It's usually caused by people being unhappy about something. Maybe they have been treated not correctly or maybe not or whatever. And that's like most of their work, and we need to consider that.
Thank you. Lars.
Yeah, so quick point since the IETF executive director as a potential owner responsible just came up. So in our draft, or at least sort of when I wrote part of that, I thought about this, right? Because I didn't think it would be the executive director, but it could be an LLC function, because let's be clear, like Jay is not going to read email all night long, every day, even more than he does now. But it would be something that could be owned by the LLC. But we felt there was value in having this actually be a community function provided by the community for the community, kind of like the IETF mailing list discussion team works. If the community wants to delegate this to the LLC in some way, right, I don't think that's a particularly bad way for it. But I thought that as a community, we weren't ready for that maybe, or we were never going to get there. But if I'm wrong, right, I'm happy to be wrong. I think it's a perfectly fine approach to look at this. But I think one person doesn't scale.
Right. And I think Elliot's draft does say that the executive director can delegate or something to that effect. But
I think Jay is in a sufficiently different time zone to the rest of us that he can happily read email all night.
yes,
long,
yes,
so
yes.
that's fine.
He's reading email while we all sleep.
Absolutely, yes. Colin Perkins, just wanted to push back slightly on Elliot's comments. I mean, clearly we have lots of different communication channels, and we don't just use email. I mean, GitHub is reasonably popular, for example. We could also perhaps even moderate the chat conversations going on here. But what I would suggest is that we know how to do email moderation, mailing list moderation, and we should write a document for that, put a procedure in place, get a sense of how it works, and then come back to the other modalities later. So solve the problem where we know how to do it, and then come back to the rest.
Okay, no, it's good input. Stephen?
People keep reminding me of stuff I've forgotten. Stephen Farley. So I guess the question is there a sense of, is any of this going to be kind of run as a process experiment to see how it works and then come back to it sometime later? Or is that not the intent at all? Do we think we know the answers? I have no strong opinion. I'm just asking.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm not sure I have a strong intuition. I mean, I was expecting that we're going to be creating documents that are intended to be revisions that in some cases will obsolete previous documents, or in some cases maybe subsume what was in, 9245 or whatever. I think, Colin's suggested approach where we do this incrementally has a lot of the same qualities as an experiment, right? We'll try this on something that we think we understand how to get traction on, and then if it works, we'll then expand it to something else. That might be a very sensible approach to this, although, and I'm not aware, I mean, does anybody have any stats or insight into, have there been abuse cases in the wikis, for example, or in the Gits that we can even identify? Is there a single existence, case of that we can point to?
I was going to talk about the process experiment.
Okay. So I'm not aware with wikis and Gits, but I am aware with Zulip and Jabber conversations.
With Jabber, yeah.
So I'm not
Murray, none of that now.
I'm not aware of one in a Git repository formally associated with it, but I am aware of some in Git repositories, not necessarily formally associated, but on the topic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Redmond, what do you think about process experiment here?
Well, I'd like to kind of talk about how one would pull that off, which is what is the authority a working group would have to run an experiment across the IETF without documenting the experiment as a document with consensus. So I think that would be tricky to do.
Well, I mean, what we could do, again, imagine that we went forward with just hypothetically a combination of these two drafts, right? We honed these down and said, these two drafts, as we're writing the scope initially, are for mailing lists, right? And then we have a little bit that says, and we're going to review this after a period of however long, right? And if we believe that these are effective principles, that will then, do a new specification that would describe their applicability to other media. Well, I mean, I'm not even saying that's experimental, because we are going to be modifying, right? For example, subsuming the 9245 function into something that's broader. But like we're saying, we're only going to do this for mailing lists at first, but have a little kind of tag onto it that says.
Right. I was largely reacting to whatever change we want to have. If we want to apply a label or do a time bound, I was envisioning to do that, it would need to be in a document. When I heard experiment, maybe I heard incorrectly that we were not codifying this in a document, and we were just kind of doing it to be input into a future document.
No, I would not favor that approach personally,
okay.
but
that's what I was hearing. So if there is an experiment codified in a document, I think we could certainly do that, and that would be in scope.
Yeah.
Jay Daly again, as my role was raised as someone within this, just to first of all say, I don't have a view on whether or not my role should do this. My job is to implement BCP. So if there's a BCP that says do it, then I'll do it. That's fine. I don't mind. I think though that this does illustrate an important point for us, which is the difference between volunteers doing this and professionals doing this, because we have risks and benefits either way. With volunteers, we have people concerned about the relationships they have with other people, where they might have to reach compromise with on other things or partner with elsewhere. We have concerns about whether somebody is acting on behalf of their employer rather than anything else, and trying to, skew things for their employer, which you don't have if you have a professional doing things. You have professionals who are much more likely to follow the rules as is and have less leeway within those, and therefore perhaps be less tolerant of certain things than otherwise. So these are some things that I think need to be thought out. And I think that personally, I can see a benefit of having both within this. It's just understanding why we need both and which particular areas we have those.
Ron.
Sorry, I got in a little late, so I didn't see the start of this discussion. Looking at this particular, I know, yeah. Looking at this particular part of what we're doing, I think having time limited is reasonable. I'd say on the order of 4 to 5 years would be long enough to know. I think if you make it any shorter than that, we've had, in the time that I've been last call moderator, we've had 2 cases of the current process showing that it is clearly faulty and not fit for purpose. And I think 4 to 5 years is long enough to know whether something is good or not. It's anything shorter than that, I don't think you'd be able to tell. And on the flip side of that, I think the average document takes about that long to get through the system. So the damage it's going to do in the worst case is not going to be that bad. If we say 4 to 5 years, at which point we need to get consensus again to either keep it or fall back to the current process, that takes out most of the risks of us ruining the IETF, which I don't think is going to happen regardless. But I think that takes away all the risks. We can say a 5-year experiment, at which point we need IETF consensus to keep it or we fall back. And that pretty much solves most of the risks of this.
I mean, a 5-year experiment. Again, I would think of as we publish a document, and then 5 years later we publish a new version of it. And it's not an experiment. That's just our ordinary. I mean, our protocols after 5 years we clean them up generally. So, Miria, sorry.
Yes, so I mean, RFCs can be updated and revised, but it's never a fast process. It doesn't have the flexibility. So I hope that we write something in an RFC after, at the end of this process that we are sure about. Like, for example, do we want the community to do this? Do we want professionals to do it? Do we want to combine this? And then leave all the implementation details to the needs we have, right? And it should be applicable to all kind of spaces where we have these problems. I don't see a difference so much about mailing lists or wikis or whatever. We need to have some agreement about how to handle all of them and the flexibility to apply it correctly.
Well, and that to me is part of what makes the idea of capturing what the values are that we want this to accomplish, right, in these documents, and say, let's figure out how to enforce these across our communication channels. I mean, with that, I think our queue was empty. Elliot, I was about to.
So all I meant by my previous statement was very simple. We should make sure that, we can do 0, 1, many, right? And just keep in mind that there are these other forum out there. That was all I meant. So I agree that having the values laid out is a great way to go. That's it.
Okay. Well, so I mean, I think we can use what remaining time we have, if no one else would like to jump up to the mic and discuss any of this now, to talk a bit about the path forward in terms of the comparison of these 2 drafts and whether what we want to do is work towards a consolidation of these drafts or to pursue them both independently. We've heard that option raised. I suppose this is something where we could use the tool even to just ask this into the room, whether we think consolidation is a better approach than pursuing both the drafts independently. People think that's a hum, or I guess we now do a show of hands poll worth doing. Elliot?
Yeah, so I think maybe, but before we go to humming and everything, like, can we ask the simple question of, does anybody object to the merging of these documents at this point?
Well, let's do the more basic one, and I have a feeling we may get this from the Jabber chat rather than the room. Does anybody object to the use of these documents as our input documents to the working group? Let's start with that.
So
yeah, I mean, we'll say all 3. We'll say including Sayer is coming in, yes, as well.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Yeah, I'll be asking about 2 or 3, so it's 3.
Yeah, as input documents and then we'll talk about whether we want to consolidate them. But like, is anybody object to using these 3 documents as the input documents to get us towards deliverables in our charter? No. This is just come to the mic or yell on Jabber if you think we're crazy. So Keith Moore says, yes, I object to the use of these documents as inputs to the working group. And immediately before him, I would object to the working group not adopting these from Martin Thompson. Do you think we should for this? Okay, let's just do it. All right. This may take me a moment. So I'm going to do, oh boy, so. Use the 3 docs as input. Start. Okay. Does everybody see it? So please make your votes. Yes, no, or no opinion.
No opinion counts as ambivalence.
No opinion counts as ambivalence. No quorum. It's kind of like voting for one of those third parties in current elections going around where it won't make any difference. Sorry. Too soon. Yes, I know. Too soon. All right. I think. So I'm not saying anybody who's voting no, including.
Well, presumably Keith can't get the MODPOD.
Oh, he can't get the MODPOD up. Okay, so we'll count one for no on Keith's behalf, but I'm not seeing anybody else that is against this. We have 35 yes, 0 for no. We'll count one for Keith, and then 4 for no opinion. 35 yes for yes. Okay, I think that's enough for us to say people seem to feel good about this. I'll bring my Jabber back up. Okay, so we're going to do that, I guess, that we're going to go for these three. So now let's do the next question. So consolidation or pursuing these independently? And Miria, you would like to get in before.
Yes, because I don't understand what consolidation means here, because I think the main point, the main difference for me is, do we want the community to handle this or do we want some professional function to do that? And how would you consolidate that?
Yeah, I mean the document. So again, assume that we're going to be making choices roughly aligned with these columns here in the process of doing that consolidation. And it will be the consensus of this group that will determine which of the two sides we're taking, or a third approach, right? I mean, I don't mean to suggest this is exhaustive. So do you follow?
No, I mean, but like you just leave that part empty and leave it for later, and then what?
Well, no. So I mean, the reason
sounds more like we start a new document and just work on all.
So the reason I brought this up is because I think it was Pete originally who suggested that it would be better not to consolidate these documents and instead to have one document that is going to deal just with the BCP 38, like E3 revision, and then like another that, you know, is going to deal with the rest. And the question is that the approach we want to take? Or do we want to take an approach where we're going to combine this into a single document with, you know, a single editorial team? Elliot would really like to get in on this behind you, Miria, so maybe he can do a better job explaining it than I am.
So the idea that I had in terms of consolidation, other people may have other ideas, but was that from the BCP 838 replacement draft perspective, we would stop producing updates to that draft, look at the issues in draft E, look at the differences and open issues against draft ECAHC moderation for where we have differences between the two drafts, and then reapply that for the for Rob Serra's draft, and just so we end up with a bunch of issues where it's agreed that there's no bias towards the text in the draft where that issue is related.
And our next working group meeting, we'll be sitting here with a Git tracker going through and saying, on this issue, where are people? On this issue, where are people? And then we'll do the questions like you're addressing, right?
Perfect. Thank you. That makes it much more clear, and
Okay.
that makes sense. I just want to say we didn't discuss at all about if we are actually replacing BCP 83 or not, right? So that nobody commented on this yet. So I'm not sure where we are on that one.
So I think Lars's draft says yes to that you are obsoleting 83. I think you are obsoleting 45, and I think you didn't say we're going to modify 83. I think it's that.
The charter says to update 83.
Yeah.
So I find it difficult to envision an outcome where we don't update 83.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Obsolete. So I really think that there's not really a use for BCP 83 if we come to a successful conclusion here, because it's such a uniquely IETF shaped tool from 20 odd years ago.
Yeah, it is like 20 years ago.
I'm not sure we want to have the discussion now, but I think it actually needs more discussion because it's 20 years ago. It's a very heavy tool, but there was an entirely different use case. The use case was people spamming our mailing list who are not part of our community, and we need to have a way to exclude them from the mailing list, which is still, which seems very natural, but it's still a heavy thing for like an open community like us. And that use case is still important. We need something for it. And that should be different from what we do here, I think.
Sure, and yeah, I think by obsoleting that document, we will subsume the portions of it that we still need right? We're not saying that's invalid. We're saying the document is no longer the document you're going to refer to find this policy, but the parts of it that we still need, I assume, would be integrated into this common document. And I see Lars nodding at that. Is that okay?
I'm not convinced about this, but
Okay.
All right, I think I got the answer from the last volley of comments, but what you're saying is consolidation is using these as input for something that will become the output of this working group. And that's just in the wider sense. We don't need to nitpick the details right now.
Yeah. I mean, this is still, again, very much a question of, do we want to continue to ask Rob and Elliot and Lars to all update their documents separately going forward on this, or do we want to do something like what Elliot described, where we're just going to have, okay, we're going with Lars's document and we're going to have issues tracked against it, and and I think that sounds like a better use of everyone's time than having 3 different people keep updating these documents. Roman?
And I would just like to repeat what Lisa said quickly. I'm not sure everyone heard, is that the charter text already says it does not commit to either obsolete or updates. It says or, and so this is not a decision we would need to make now.
Okay. All right, so I guess we could do a show of hands related to this as well. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Andrew Camping, a few people have put this in the chat, but it wasn't said on the mic, which is the show of hands is just getting a sense of what people think here, but decision making
will be confirmed on the mailing list, that in accordance with IETF policy, yes. Okay, so let's do a show of hands. So consolidate based on, no, I'll say consolidate using ECAHC as a baseline. Okay, so yes, no, or no opinion to consolidate using ECHC as a baseline for our previous discussion. Yes. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of people don't seem to care either way, but yet more people think this is the right approach. We have a single dissenter. Am I missing in the jabber any other dissent than what we see here? 2 dissenters, sorry. Yes, please dissent. If you have dissent, come to the mic. Let's discuss. I mean, this is the time to do it.
It's Pete Resnick. I just in case anybody was wondering, I said no. I was going back and forth between no opinion and no. I don't think we should use any one of these 3 documents as a base. I think we should let those authors sort of combine what they know now from discussion and what they will learn in the next little bit into a new document. And I get what the problem with that is, which is why I was going to no opinion half the time. But I just think there's enough open issues here that using any one of these as the base is probably not all that useful.
Really? Because I think having a baseline document, just a single one to go off of, is just going to save a lot of time. It's just,
like I said,
okay.
I was ambivalent and then decided meh.
Okay. Brian, yes, sorry.
I suspect Elliot and I might be about to say the same thing, which is we're happy not to update the document we're authors on, and happy to have our ideas merged across into there. I don't think the working group should tell us we have to update our document. We're happy, if we're happy to have it merged across, then our document's not going to get updated.
Yep.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I was thinking I was hearing from Pete possibly a whiff of volunteerism.
Oh yeah.
As an editor.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm failing in my chairing duties. I did not hear somebody volunteering to be an editor of this document there. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to close out this poll. So between yes and no opinion, yes, between yes and no opinion, it looks like we've got a lot of people who at least are okay with this path going forward, and I see only 2 dissenters in the vote. And yep. Okay. Fantastic. So I mean, that sounds like a direction that we could then take. I mean, I think I heard a plan. I think probably we don't have much more discussion we're going to do here today, because most of the discussion that should follow the beginning of the execution of that plan. So, I mean, I've got nothing else. I think I need to ask the group today. Lisa, is there anything else you want to bring up? I see Elliot's the mic, or Ron, are you still in queue? Okay.
So I just have one request. I think we just need an issue tracker.
Okay.
So if you chairs can work on setting up an issue tracker, and if you do it against draft ECAHC, I'm sorry, it's just that combination of letters I cannot speak.
Yeah.
If you do it against that, that's fine. However you guys want to work it, I'm happy as long as you have an issue.
Okay, we will work on that.
I was going to add at some point, thanks, John, that I heard a lot of support for gradual moderation, a lot of support for making it accountable and mostly within the community rather than professionals or LLC homed. Lots of course, we're past the point of deciding whether this needs review, because that was in the charter, but still a lot of agreement that moderation processes need review. So I just wanted to emphasize that getting the documents combined is not closing the list of work that the working group can consider. But we think that given the amount of support for the various ideas in the two drafts, seeing them combined with authorial discretion over which one you use as a baseline is the next step and not a final step.
Yep. So step towards is eventually getting like some kind of working group item. Maybe we could, have something that's in enough shape. People could start considering if that should be our baseline going forward in this working group as a working group item. And then it'll be called draft IETF. And we won't have to sit here reading every time EC, reading this eye chart of the author names in it. But with that, I mean, I have no further business for the group today. So if other people would like to discuss anything with our remaining half an hour we have, or, we could just go get coffees before the lines get crazy out there. Yeah. Coffee sounds like a plan. Well, this was a great, I think, actually very productive discussion. It was a very civil discussion. Thank you all for coming and participating. I know this is not the most fun thing that we get to do at the IETF, but I think we all agree that it needs to be done. And I appreciate everybody being here. And thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody on the Jabber. And I think with that, we will conclude this meeting. All right. Bye-bye, Lisa. Get some sleep, I guess. What time is it there?
It's time to wake up.
It's time to wake up? Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much again for making the time.